Good evening. I'm Norma Gleason with the Metropolitan Arts Commission. I'm the Public Art Program Manager, and I have here with me tonight Michael Graves, who is an architect and so well known that maybe 200 magazines across the United States have been publishing accounts of his work lately. He is in Portland here tonight because he has been involved with the public art selection process. He is, as I think almost everyone knows, the designer of the Portland building, which is going up downtown between the county courthouse and the city hall right now, and which is attracting much attention because it is suddenly acquiring color. And we are involved in a project with a number of other citizens and artists in the community to commission a great, wonderful sculpture for that building on the Fifth Avenue side. So we were involved in meetings today and reviewing maquettes at the Wentz Gallery, which is at the Pacific Northwest College of Art and part really of the Portland Art Museum. And I guess the first question, Michael, which you must be anxious to answer, is what was that meeting like? What was it like to review sculptures and drawings by artists who had worked for 3 months to come up with a proposal for a sculpture for your building?
I suppose there are lots of ways one could answer that question. One very positive thing one could say is that a couple of the proposals were, I felt, well, displayed the kind of energy that we attempted on the design of our building. I mean, you could see in at least two of the proposals the kind of thought and interest and really skill that goes into something like that. But I thought that the sheer involvement or energy was extant in those two works that I feel is in the building, though they are very much their own thing and not necessarily like the building. I think...
Is there anything like the building?
Well, I don't know whether there's anything like the building. There are a lot of things like the building. It's the language of architecture, after all, which is a later question, I'm sure. But the other things I could say about today's meeting was that I suppose in the, shall I say, the democratic process, it exhibited a lot of care amongst all those people who were deliberating and all those people who were really had themselves and their own minds and their wills on the line, because everything was recorded, and I think there was an enormous amount of care and consideration, and those aren't empty words on the part of the citizens, the artists involved in that selection. I would also say that I'm not sure in my own mind whether the selection of art or architecture works best in a democratic kind of idea. I mean, that will be misinterpreted by a lot of people, I'm sure. But one is worried, I suppose, in the long run, not so much in our building or in this piece of sculpture, but I guess I'm a little worried that there isn't a way to select works of art that don't reach a lower level because of the number of voices entering into the debate, the discussion.
So you think that what you get is a sort of monotone, a kind of compromise?
I think you could get that.
Yeah.
I mean, if one had to vote on every Picasso or Manet or Ang, we probably would end up with, you know, a kind of chewing gum for the eyes. Not so good, but it's in the minds or the abilities of those kinds of people to extend our interests and do something that is not orthodox, that the people necessarily aren't ready for, or whatever. But I'm just not sure that public selection of art is ever going to lead to great art.
We have an interesting process, to my mind, in Portland, because we're combining on one committee a number of different types of people. We have a citizen at large, and on the Portland building, that's John Hampton with Hampton Lumber. And then we have 3 artists or arts professionals who are very much their own people. Louis Bunce, who has lived in Portland for years and years and is a very well-respected painter, and Lucinda Parker, who is younger and also very well-respected, and then Ed Caduro, an arts professional. And those arts professionals are the type of people you often find on public art selection committees. But in addition to those 3, you then have an arts commissioner, also an architect, John Thodos, and you have a city representative, Mike Cutter, and a county representative, Don Rocks, and of course yourself. And I am inclined to think that mixture can be very rich, because I've never been persuaded that only artists can judge art, for instance, and it puts into my mind a vision of people building, let's say, a Gothic cathedral. Now, I don't know how they made those art selections. It was basically, it seems to me, 600 years ago, 800 years ago, a kind of upwelling out of a community, a spirit that sort of rose up and expressed itself in a lot of works which at that time were probably not ever called art anyway. They were simply stoneworks for a cathedral. So it seems to me, in a way, the fact that our committee has some strong roots in a lot of different areas can make for some real excitement, although I hear you on the dangers as well. And I guess actually what we could confess tonight is that although we thought we had our task finished, I think, or close to finished today, before we entered the meeting, we have a longer road ahead of us than we thought. How would you describe the committee's decision finally at the end of today?
Mm-hmm. From the original submissions, over 100, we narrowed that list to 5, as many people do know, and those 5 people were paid a small amount of money to give us a model and drawings of their proposals. From those 5, we expected perhaps that one would emerge as the dominant figure, and we would be able to choose that person. That didn't happen. What happened, in fact, was that we have chosen 2 people, and we'll ask them, in a sense, to refine what they've done, because we think that in both cases there's a potential in the sculptural elements of both that are enormous. However, nobody on the committee felt that they were willing to say that this is the one. And so I guess we all wanted them to extend themselves a little further. That's not to suggest great disappointment at all, but just as we went through schematic design and design development in our own building, essentially that's what's happening here, is they're developing their designs, and we're asking for them to resubmit in a 2-month period. Again, paying them enough for their work, but not an elaborate amount of money.
This is, I think, an interesting project for another reason as well, because originally, when you were in competition for the design of the building, you were asked by the Portland City Council to develop some idea for art, and they indicated that probably 1% of the construction budget would be spent on art. And subsequently, after you had indeed done work, then a regular program was mandated by the city that 1% of all new construction and renovation costs would be spent on art. But you, meanwhile, had very carefully incorporated into your building an idea for a sculpture, and in fact had yourself suggested the theme and really the outline of the sculpture. And what's interesting to me about that is that you seem, perhaps uniquely among contemporary American architects, to be very involved with every aspect of your building. And you are not making, as far as I can tell, any separation between what you do as an architect and what another person might do as an artist. And I think that is fascinating, and I wonder, why is that true of you? How did that all develop? Is there a way you could explain what seized you so that...
One thing I should explain before I'm talking about what I would see as the second half of your question is that we were asked in the original program for the Portland building to specify, describe, delineate in some way how art would be incorporated in the building. And I must say that I took that suggestion or that request literally. The other two architects who were in the finals of the Portland building competition did not. They were much more abstract about it in the sense that both of them used fountains, and that is, it's a more benign gesture. Everybody loves a fountain. It's like motherhood.
Fountains are very popular in Portland.
Exactly, and they, I think, knew what they were doing. I didn't do that. In fact, I very much want to bring back the quality of building and art incorporated in each other, the kind of inseparable nature of those two things, where one is the embellishment of the other, neither architecture nor painting or sculpture winning, but certainly both identifying the thematic resonance of the three-dimensional proposition, whatever it is. So I immediately got myself into hot water by, I suppose, over-specifying what it would be, but it did say that we should do that. So I did it and was delighted to do it. It also said, and I think this is a misunderstanding amongst a lot of people, it said that the architect would not be the artist for the building. Could not be, by law, could not be. So I never expected to do Portlandia. I expected that I could suggest that theme and it could be thrown out, it could be incorporated, a lot of things could happen, but I could say a lot more about the face of the building, the front door, the entrance of the Portland citizens beneath the symbol of the city by using that art. So I was not about to give it up into a fountain, but do something, I suppose more literal in the thematic resonance of the city symbol.
So you really see that sculpture, which is 3 stories above the main entrance and very dramatically placed there, as a welcoming kind of a real gesture to the people of Portland. This is your building, and when you walk in, there is, in a way, something here to greet you.
Yes, all architecture, no matter how figural it is to some degree abstract. It is geometrical, it is linear, it is, we speak about the facade of a building, we speak about the plan of a building. They represent buildings as we know them, and within buildings there's detail, there are a number of elements which are more literally figural, as we know in column capitals, for instance, or in various kinds of frames around certain elements of a building. But it all remains, to some degree, abstract. And it's very hard for the man on the street,
or the woman on the street?
Man, generically, man, woman.
This is abstract man.
Yeah, abstract man.
Okay.
The people of Portland or any place to identify with those kinds of abstractions. There are instances in the U.S. Capitol, for instance, where the acanthus leaves of Greece have been given a new form, where they've used corn stalks and corn husks and so on to display the difference between Greece and America and the new country. But even those symbols for our society remain somewhat abstract. However, if you have a female figure on your city seal, though she, in a way, is as well abstracted, she is nevertheless recognizable by all people as a female figure, and the entrapment of the landscape and the water around her is well known on that symbol. And the iconographic or icons that are as well within the body of that symbol are clarified or clear in the rendering of that, and we tried to incorporate those in that particular figure. So yes, the building itself any building is somewhat abstract. What I was trying to do is get over that boundary and bring it closer to a figural condition, and I think that the two together then support each other. What is abstract and what is capable of having double reading, and what is figural and what is more literal, therefore, can work together in that kind of language.
So you felt that given this figure's presence on the Portland city seal, that this was expressing something about Portland, and would you say, working and living in Princeton, New Jersey, that there's a real difference, that you would expect a very different kind of symbol for Princeton than we are apparently finding here for Portland?
Well, Princeton is a tiny little town, a village, a college town. Doesn't have a city symbol. It isn't a great urban gathering as this city is. And so I don't expect that of Princeton in the way I wouldn't of other small towns in this state. But this city has a seal, and this city, and that is a government building. And if I can, in a sense, turn the rheostat up on the front door of that building by virtue of that city seal, re-seen, which is a fine tradition as well in all art form, I will do it. Obviously, there are other ways to skin the cat. Lots of other ways that we could have incorporated a fountain. In fact, we've just designed a building in Louisville, Kentucky, which is on the river, and its urban gesture, its public gesture, is a great waterfall, which makes a kind of tension between the Ohio River on one side and the building adjacent to it, and the people of that city on the main street of that, the river street of that city, are in a sense held between those two bodies of water, and trying to make a thematic reference of that water city, Louisville, Kentucky. But I mean, that is an appropriate gesture, we thought, for Louisville, where this one seemed appropriate here. As I say, there could have been other ways of doing it.
Sure, but this was obviously something you felt really strongly about Portland. How did you learn about Portland coming from such a distance? Well,
the way I suppose anybody would. I walked the streets, I looked at the buildings, I drew, I photographed, I read everything I could about Portland. There's lots in our libraries in Princeton, the great university library. I looked at Portland histories there, as well as bought books here and took them back.
You may know more about Portland than many people living in Portland.
Well, it was very interesting. I asked the then mayor and the city council and other friends here about the Portland symbol, about the figure on that. We're playing too much of this, I think, but nevertheless, who she was and what her background was, and nobody knew. So we could all, whether I'm from Portland or not, recognize the various symbols: the wheat, the Mount Hood, the three-master coming in from one side,
the
cogwheel for industry. All of those, all the icons of the city symbol, city seal, are clear to us because they're so literal. But they didn't know what her name was. They didn't know any more about her. I finally called the city librarian, who looked it up and found that her name was actually as perfect for the 19th century. Her name was Lady Commerce. I thought it was a bit pedantic, and, but perfect for that time, 1851, the founding of this city. And we gave her a slightly more lyrical name, Portlandia, which has I guess, stuck now.
It definitely has stuck.
And so I didn't know whether, for instance, she had come from Greek mythology or where her real roots were. Of course, those roots would, any goddess-like heroic figure would come from Greek mythology, but she had been completely Americanized by the time.
She had gone west, and great changes had occurred.
Right. Made her commercial front out here.
So now tell me, how have you come to be where you are, which is a very well-known architect doing very striking work and managing, I believe, to survive in a very competitive profession where it is not so easy to survive, and where maybe right now it's especially difficult with building trades and a slowdown in the economy. But what, I guess I'm throwing 4 or 5 questions at you at once, but what keeps you going? Because I have a feeling that's what started it all in the first place.
Well, I find the question in part amusing, because though there appears to be some sort of success now, there at least is some sort of recognition of something happening, that when people are discussing what we in our office are doing. And I say we because it's very much we, the office of 25 people that are, we're very much like a family, and those aren't hollow words either. But I spent a long time struggling, and I was reminded the other day by a former employee who came back to visit that there was a period not very long ago where the phone didn't ring for 2 years. I mean, did not ring about, and to be patronized means that somebody has to ask you to do something. Otherwise, you're making up things, which many of my colleagues do. Make up projects, do competitions, do anything that will keep them aesthetically active, professionally active. You don't make any money doing that sort of thing. That's not, partly that's not what it's about anyway. But you can, if you don't pay the rent, after a while become pretty bitter about it all. To short-circuit that problem, I have taught for 20 years, and up until about 2 or 3 years ago, I essentially lived on very little and put my university salary in the office. It was very difficult and hard on my domestic scene, I can tell you that. But it hasn't been easy. It really hasn't. I don't mean to overplay the struggle. I've enjoyed every bit of it. But I was ready a lot earlier than this to build the Portland building, in quotes.
Right.
And I'm a little bit amused, I suppose, at many of the comments. This is his first building. We built 16 buildings. That isn't very many, however. People would point to that and say, well, look how many buildings Bob Frasca's built. He's about your age. In fact, we were only a year apart in school. And friends there in Cincinnati. But Bob and his office have built probably hundreds of buildings. But we've been doing our homework, and I've worked hard at whatever I've done. We work all the time and enjoy it. I do teach and draw and paint and make buildings. And as you said in your earlier question, I don't make a great distinction, though I think every discipline has its limits. Painting does, and sculpture does, and architecture does, and furniture design, and we're even designing textiles and silverware and other elements of that sort, industrial design. I love it, you know, I just absolutely love doing it. I was ready earlier, but maybe what I was doing was in the minds of the public, or those people willing to ask you to do something, they were not ready. I felt I was, but maybe the work wasn't what it is now. Certainly, the work has changed. Other people doing very similar things to the things I was doing then were patronized. And I think part of it's luck, and part of it's sort of the fall of the dice, and part of it's one's own personality or one's whatever. But I had very few connections in the old boy network of architecture. That was difficult. I elected, unlike other colleagues who would go to work for a large firm and work their way up in that firm, which makes life different than mine, not easier necessarily, but different. I didn't want to do that. One of the reasons I didn't feel after college that I was very well educated. I went to very good schools. I think the level of architectural education in America in the 50s, when I went to school, was at its lowest. And I mean, I know what is taught today and what was taught then, and there are worlds of difference between the two. The influences of Walter Gropius in the 50s through Harvard and so on and the burning of the books, and not literally, but
you mean the burning of past traditions?
The burning of history, theory, the idea that there was an architectural literature was not a part of our education. And therefore, when I say I was doing my homework, to teach at Princeton for the last 20 years is really means preparing myself to do the buildings that I'm doing today.
Sure.
I could have cut my teeth earlier, as I say, and I did do that on small projects. It's interesting as well to me that the small projects that we did have earned us a reputation, not for doing small projects, but for doing architecture in a certain way.
And for doing quality projects.
Well-to-do architecture.
Right.
And anyway.
So, in a way, you're suggesting you might have you're not, well, this is I don't know where I'm coming up with a surfing metaphor, but you're not only, in a way, perhaps catching a wave, but you are very much a person who can ride a wave at this point, too, perhaps.
My friend Peter Eisman says that we all have 5 years in the sun.
How does it feel in the sun?
Well, I don't know. I'm not sure I am in the sun. I'm in bright lights tonight, but you know, architecture is so hard, as literature must be, as good music must be, that you really don't feel that you're riding the wave. You feel that every day, though I absolutely love what I do, it is so hard doing it well. The struggle of making something is so difficult that you don't think about a magazine interview, or in a way you don't even think about the next building. You think about how difficult the thing that you're presently involved in is for you. Architecture, for me, does not come easily. And I don't mean to say that for others it must. Maybe it does. Some of my friends are very facile, and I guess I'm saying that in the pejorative. But if I do something well, or if it's adjudged to be done well, I'm not sure who ultimately will be our judges, but I think that I'm my sternest one, my best critic. Well,
you know, that's maybe the difference. You said facile, and I think you were being critical of your friends, or of people that you know who find it very easy and maybe don't give it a lot of attention. But there is always a difference between the way people create, so that from what I know, someone like Mozart just simply wrote out the music, and you know, he might as well have been taking a transcript from some heavenly source, while Beethoven, on the other hand, apparently went over and over and over and over his scores, and was just constantly chopping and revising and tearing his hair out. And musical critics have examined early examples of scores and found them not so good. I mean, that seems like a ridiculous thing to say about Beethoven, but they have really seen changes in progress. So people work differently. What's hard for you right now? What is a project that you're working on right now that is difficult?
The most difficult project we have, and I must say, it might be the most difficult project I will ever do, and that comes early to say that. But we've been asked to extend the Whitney Museum in New York on Madison Avenue. The Whitney is presently built from the middle of the block between 74th and 75th up to 75th Street on Madison, and we've been asked to extend the building from its present boundary on Madison down to 74th, in that sense doubling the size of the building, and the new addition will be a little larger than the original Whitney. The language of the Whitney Museum is, in terms of our earlier conversation, very, very abstract. It is a building some people see as upside down in terms that it is an inverted ziggurat. But it doesn't refer to the human body. It does not refer to an anthropomorphic metaphor. It does not, I'm not being critical of it, I'm just saying what it is, how one reads it. It's a very dark building, it's almost black.
It looks a little like a fortress in my mind, I mean, having been there.
But nevertheless, to the trustees of the Whitney Museum, it is an endearing place. It is a place filled with nostalgia for them because of openings, because of shows and successes they've had there, and people they know there, and the art that's been in that place now since the early 60s when Marcel Breuer built it. And it is a place, nevertheless, that presents difficulty for any architect to add to. It is not a building that readily accepts additions. And in fact, like the Guggenheim, the Whitney sees itself very much as an object, and there is a wall built on the south side of the Whitney, which in a sense is an exclusive wall. The brownstones move up to it, stop, there is a concrete wall, and then Breuer's building begins. We are asked to come up to that concrete wall. So it may, somebody in my office recently pointed out that the Whitney might be, for us, the most important project we ever do. Not only the most difficult, but also the most important. Now I can think of larger, grander, whatever things that one might be given in time, but for a building as public as that, as culturally important as that, and architecturally important because of what I, myself, a number of people are about today in trying to right the balance between the heavy hand of abstract modernism that has now been the prevailing, shall we say, style.
It's been with us
for a very long time now, but not a return to the past, but indeed a re-establishment of the language of architecture, and those are heavy words to say that modern architecture didn't do that, but it did use a different language than architecture as we had known it for 3,000 years. And if we saw it on a little bleep on the scale, it would pale amongst all the other built realities that we have in the world. And I think that a number of people will be successful in seeing a more humanistic architecture emerge now. And that has nothing to do with the re-seeing of former styles. It does, on the other hand, try to identify the anthropomorphic and natural analogies that are found in buildings and that both the cognoscenti and the man on the street identify with.
It's funny, when I think of the Whitney myself, and I think of your architecture, I think that they're pretty antithetical. I mean, I can hardly think of anything more different than Breuer's architecture and your architecture, and you may have the kind of challenge that Hannibal had when he was trying to reach Rome with elephants and crossing the Alps at the same time. It may be very hard, but on the other hand, it is such a remarkable challenge that it could be.
If we can do it, I think it will really be something. I've worked in a lot of small towns, and people have said about working in other places that aren't often visited, or so small that they don't visit them, that if Michael bombs there, nobody will know. But if it's in Portland, Oregon, or if it's on Madison Avenue in New York, everybody knows.
A few people will know.
Everybody will know.
You know what? Maybe shouldn't be unleashing all these metaphors, but it is such a dark building. It makes me think of one of those sort of specks of sand, you know, that you get in an oyster, and the oyster creates this pearl. And that's,
we'll see.
That's
Norma
perhaps.
Catherine, we'll see. I don't think the Whitney folks, our clients, really expect an extension of the language of the present building. They expect a companion piece.
Yeah.
And they will both be the Whitney Museum.
A real marriage.
Yeah, and like a diptych, a two-panel painting, there will be a conversation between the two. If the archangel is on one side and the Virgin is on the other in a diptych, those two things are never expected to. In fact, the conversation is set up by the opposition. And I'm not saying that we are. If Breuer made a black building, we will make a white. Not at all. But there will be a respect on one hand, but a tension that will be. I presume is why I was chosen. That might be possible.
Could we take a look, do you think, at some slides of drawings that you have, which show some of the development in the Portland building? What we don't have, unfortunately, is how those drawings really metamorphosed into something, well, that anyone in Portland can see right now on the street. They are really beginning sketches, but they give an idea of how ideas developed, and I would love to ask you some questions about them.
Sure. Well, when I begin a project, and as in our building here, the plan is the generator of most architectural ideas. It is the scoring of the work. There is no plan here. This is an elevation of a building, but we already knew at that time of course, what the size of I mean, this is silly to have to say, but the literal size of the site was, and its bearing capacity. One of the reasons the building steps back is because there's different bearing condition, what the ground will support
up above it.
Economically above it. Now, we could have come to the edge of the sidewalk all the way up, but it would have been dramatically more expensive. So stepping the building back saved enormous amounts of money. It also gave us a chance to see a shorter distance between the core of the building and the outside face of the building, and therefore that distance allowed more light into the building because your blocks here are 200 feet.
Now this is right. Now this is different. This almost looks a little rougher than the first one that we saw, or shall I say that the forms are really shifting. I mean, I'm not. What is this? Did this sketch take place before the one that we just saw? Was it?
No, I think in fact it was after. But
what were you working? What were you thinking of?
Well,
there?
all of these will start to show, though there are variations on a theme, and in your way of describing the way Beethoven worked, there is a seeing of the sketches over and over and over again. One uses tracing paper, one looks at the drawing through the next drawing and makes a new version of it. But each of them have a kind of tripartite or three-part organization, a base, a body, a head to the building. And that's in part what I mean by being anthropomorphic. This is a sketch of just a portion of the building.
And it shows.
It shows the core, the center core, as expressed on the outside, and one is struggling with the language of this particular place. There's very vaguely you can see at the base a detail of a wave pattern, for instance, a reference to the Willamette.
This one is a little harder to see, but you can see the building there on the right. And when you say anthropomorphic, you're saying like a human body, you have a base and you have a trunk.
You have a leg, you have a body, you have the head is the place where the light is most plentiful, obviously, and that idea is seen in all traditional architecture. Modern architecture, generally, perhaps this isn't fair for all modern architecture, but modern architecture's metaphor is the machine. It's the Industrial Revolution. It's the way things were made, not by hand, but by machines. And like a good radio or like a good symbol of other sorts, that metaphor can be turned upside down, can be inverted. A glass box has no head, it has no base. And I think those qualities, bad, good, or indifferent, are ultimately alienating to the human being, to the man on the street.
Got you. Now, what is happening here? We have a sort of stepped...
Well, again, the core is referred to in the center. The core, by that I mean the elevator core, and the support for that large or keystone or lintel figure at the top starts to suggest the difference between the city floors, which are the base 10 floors, and then the 5 floors where that keystone occurs, for the rentable office space above. And there is a dramatic difference in this building. The head of the building, were said in that manner, is really the part that the city will rent out to help pay for the ground 10 floors. And so there's a functional difference in the building expressed in the outside.
Huh. How many of these sketches do you think you did when you were making these plans?
I really don't know. I work in sketchbooks a lot. My sketchbooks are filled with drawings, plans, elevation sections of this building, as well as other buildings or furniture or even textiles that we're doing.
I think
one
maybe,
is continually doing that all the time. But
hundreds, thousands?
No, hundreds, I would
hundreds.
say. Yeah. Lots and lots of drawings.
What all times of day and night? Do you get inspired? Do you just...
No, I work when I work and I play when I play. I mean, I don't draw very well on airplanes. I don't draw very well at dinner. I don't draw
when you're playing.
I don't play very much, but
what do you do when you play?
I look at architecture.
No, come on.
I go to flea markets.
You go to flea markets.
Well, for instance, a level of play at the moment is that we're doing stage sets and costume design for Laura Dean, a modern dancer in New York, a choreographer in New York. And so I'm, in a sense, catching up on lots of dance and going to Joffrey and going to Laura Dean and going to other modern dance. I know a little bit about dance, but not a lot. And I mean, I have a layman's sort of association with dance, but now I get to do a lot more because I now have a reason to do it. So you
need reasons to do.
I guess I do,
to
because
play.
Life for me is one big deadline, and I'm never finished, and I'm always late, and therefore to say I must go to the dance is very pleasant for me.
How does that affect you to have everything a deadline? I mean, deadline is a funny word, isn't it? It has a word dead in it.
Yes, it's an awful word, but you finally have to finish, you know. And if I hadn't been required, or any artist had not been required to have the date that something is finally due, like our 5 sculptors today, or when I had to finally finish the drawings for this building, you know, a work of art is never finished, and you would just continue and suffer with that thing. Suffer gladly, I must say, in most cases, but ultimately some part of the society says we have to have it.
Come up with it.
Yes, and so that does happen ultimately, and we adhere to that requirement. Everybody does, I suppose. You can't really be effective unless you do that, but you know, in the Beaux-Arts there is an expression called en charrette, and charrette means cart, and where the Beaux-Arts architects, the students, did not work within the studio. They worked in their own studios at home or in the master studio, but they did not work on the Rue de Beaux-Arts in most cases. They brought their work to the school for judging, for their juries, and that's where we get those words that we continually use in architecture when something is judged academically or within the academic tradition. But the student would bring his work to the Beaux-Arts on the cart, and his friends would pull the cart. The boards were enormous. They might be 5, 6, 7 feet long. They were watercolor stretches, and the student would be drawing while taking the work to be judged, and he would literally be on the cart, and therefore we call it en charrette, on the cart, and all architects are literally en charrette.
En charrette. There's a great story about a painter, Turner, similar to that. Apparently he was often, I mean, well respected 19th century. He's very well respected now. I mean, I guess he's really a forerunner of Impressionists. And he was having a show. Now, I would love to say it was at the British Museum, but that doesn't seem to make sense. But it was a very impressive exhibition with his work and other painters' works. And typically, he would come in at any of these shows with his paintbrushes and the show was going to open in the next hour, and he was still painting away. And one day he was frenetically painting because he had been hung next to a very wonderful, wonderful painting, full of colors and beautiful sunsets, and his had been a very sort of pearly, misty gray painting which just sort of floated away next to this extravagant, and he came in with his paintbrushes, and about half an hour, I think, before the doors were to open, and painted this wonderful orange circle right in the middle of his painting, which I guess later became a buoy, but totally knocked out the painting hanging right next to him. So I had a feeling he was, and of course there are stories that he lashed himself to the masts of boats in storms so he could really catch the sights. But I don't know, now you're saying really
that's not what I do for
you
enjoyment.
don't do that, but you do go to the dance. Now I want to know, since you have given me this opening, how else you play.
I read once that Robert Motherwell, the great American painter, felt very guilty because on Saturday afternoon when he was not painting, or Sunday, or over the weekend when he actually stopped painting, he would pick up books about painting and simply look at pictures. I have a very good library, and my library is a great resource to me. I love to look at pictures. I love to look at buildings. I love to look at artifacts. I like to see them in situ. I like to see them in the literature of architecture. Why I say I would like to look at art, I like to look at artifacts. I go to antique shows. I go to flea markets. I look at things. I'm constantly looking at things and drawing. That probably would be very boring to other people, but I like it. I also love athletic events. I go to baseball all the time.
You do?
Yes.
Baseball, I think.
I'm from the Midwest. I'm a jock at heart.
That's hard to believe, but you know, I think baseball is a lot like a dance. I think it's a wonderful sport that way. And I love how, I was going to say still it can get, just how nothing can happen really for innings at a time. And then suddenly all of this remarkable, amazing movement all at once that's just precise and beautiful, and also has its limitations. I mean, it's very much limited by the field and the rules, and dusk is falling and the grass is green.
Well, I don't identify with players themselves, though I know Tom Seaver. I don't know any other players, so that is not part of it. But I like that particular sport, though I never played baseball. I played other sports. I didn't. There's something about it as an observer, as a spectator, that I find so much more interesting than professional basketball, which I find so enormously boring because of what has happened to the game in the last 20 years. But that's beside the point. I like to garden. I like to do things to my house, which is constantly under construction. And it's too much to say it's a laboratory, but it's a place where things are tested and tried and so on. I like to draw. It's a busman's holiday. The whole thing.
I think on that note, we can say good night.
Thank you, Noel.